Today I'm going to give you a really short mini lesson on the difference between going back and forth with your evidence. All of you know that when you provide a piece of evidence in your paragraph, you have two choices. It can either be a direct quote or it can be paraphrased in your own words. But I'm going to have you practice today going back and forth between the two. This is going to help you be a better writer and it will make your paragraphs better. It's important that you practice this concept today so that when you are perfecting and getting better with your paragraph, you'll be able to decide and have variety. You can't have three quotes in one paragraph, and you also can't have three paraphrased. So you have to have variety, and that's part of being a good writer. So that is definitely what I would like for you to leave today understanding is how to have a little bit of each and how to go back and forth between the two. Okay, so if we go ahead and make sure you have a copy of this paper, it's in your purple basket. You're also going to need a pencil today and a green and yellow highlighter. So if you want to pause the video and make sure you have this paper, you can write your name up at the top since this is going to be turned in, and grab a green highlighter and a yellow highlighter, and you are going to need a pencil. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and get those three things, and then come back to me when you are ready to begin this quick little mini lesson. All right, so hopefully you're ready to start, and I'm going to have you go ahead and I want you to turn to page 29 in your tangerine book. Forgot to mention that. You also need your tangerine book. So pause the video when you have turned to page 29 and we'll begin. The very first topic sentence that we're going to prove is that football is boring. Now again, it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with this. This is Paul's viewpoint. He's saying that football is boring. So now we have to go on page 29 and we have to find a piece of evidence about Paul feeling that football is boring. So if you look about halfway down the page, you'll see, then again, I don't understand why Dad loves football. I've played football, real football, in the junior league. It's boring. You just stand around most of the time waiting for somebody to tell you what to do. And in the end, some guy like Eric, who hasn't even worked up a sweat, can come in and grab all the glory. It doesn't work that way in soccer. So this is a perfect example to use about proving that my topic sentence is football is boring, this is a great piece of evidence to use because of this area right here. Let me see if I can zoom in for you. I mean, Paul flat out just simply directly tells you that it's boring. So if that isn't an excellent piece of evidence for us to use to prove that Paul thinks it's boring, I don't know what is. You don't even have to make an inference there. There's nothing hidden. So that is what we will use for our piece of evidence off of page 29. In fact, I might even take it a little bit further. I also like the next line. You just stand around most of the time waiting for somebody to tell you what to do. I almost feel like this piece of evidence is slightly stronger than it's boring. I feel like the part that I just circled, or wait, better yet, so you can see it better, the part that I have underlined, I feel like that part is almost giving you a more specific reason as to why it's boring instead of just saying it is. So either one of those would work really well. So feel free to copy down my example here that I have for you. So the first thing that I had to do was to paraphrase the evidence into my own words. So when I paraphrased it, I wrote to begin, and with a green highlighter, I make that my transition word that I use, which is the first thing that you have to do in the sentence. Then I have my smooth introduction. Paul feels, if it's the character, Paul shouted, Paul expressed, Paul explained. If you want to do the author instead of a character, it would be to begin, the author shows us, the author tells us, the author identifies. But you have to have some kind of smooth introduction before you get to the actual yellow part with your yellow highlighter, which is the actual piece of evidence that you are using. So as you can see, the smooth introduction would be the second thing. The evidence is your third. So I call this the 1, 2, 3, concept. And that is what I want you to remember from today. Then, after I paraphrased it, it's asking you to go down below and you're going to provide the direct quote. So if you were to go back to page 29, you would be able to find the direct quote, and that's easy because you're just copying that down. But don't forget to use the 1, 2, 3 concept. So when I went to page 29 and I found the quote that I wanted to use, I decided that I didn't necessarily need to use the entire quote. As you can see here, it's rather long. It's boring. You just stand around most of the time waiting for somebody to tell you what to do. I didn't feel like writing all of that out. So instead, you can see that I used the ... Make sure it's 3. The ellipses is a great tool for you to use when you don't think that maybe you should be using too much of the author's words, too much of the quote. So I ended it with the ... and I am done because I did the 1, 2, 3. I used my transition word first. I then have the smooth introduction second, and then my actual evidence is third. So that is the 1, 2, 3 concept. So let's practice it again together. All right, if we take a look at the next one, number 2, down below, it says to go to page 34, and we're looking for a piece of evidence that shows some kids are being mean to Paul. So open your book and go to page 34, and you'll see down halfway through, I didn't realize at first that the boy was talking to me, and I had no idea what he meant. Eric and his friends laughed about the joke. Then the bus doors opened and we filed in. I can't put all of the details in order now, but it became clear to me later that for some reason the big kids on the school bus were calling me Eclipse Boy. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and paraphrase that evidence that I just read to you. And of course, I know that my 1, 2, 3 concept is to start with a transition, so I picked instance. For instance, my smooth introduction, Paul realizes is going to be my introduction, and the actual evidence, a time when he was bullied and called names. So Paul making that realization on the bus that the kids were not laughing with him, but rather at him, definitely will prove my topic sentence that some kids are mean to Paul. And I did follow my 1, 2, 3. 1, my transition word, which I don't have a highlighter, but you would highlight that green. You're going to underline your smooth introduction, and then you're going to highlight the actual evidence, yellow, and then that would be your third step. So you've done the 1, 2, 3. Down below, I have to put that paraphrased evidence into a direct quote. So now that means I need to go back to the actual page in the book on 34 and kind of figure out how I want and how much of that quote I want to use. Because if you remember correctly, it was a long quote. There is no way I can put all of that into a direct quote. So I need to find the part where he's realizing that people are making fun of him. So all of this right here in the beginning is more of an introduction, just kind of setting you up. I truly believe that right here, the very last part, is the actual and only sentence or part of the sentence that I need to prove. So I'm going to use my ellipses again, but I'm going to put the dots in the beginning because this is the part that I'm taking out. So it'll look like this. As you can see, I have the ... So I'm going to grab my pencil, you should too, and I'll write, for instance, Paul remembers, and I know that I'm doing this correctly because I'm following the 1, 2, 3. 1, for instance, second thing I need to do is have a smooth transition. So Paul remembers. And then the actual evidence is that the kids on the bus were calling him Eclipse Boy. Because I used the smooth introduction of Paul remembers because I feel like he makes this realization that they weren't laughing with him, that it was actually at him and they were being very cruel. All right, so let's do the last one together. There's my 1, 2, 3. Okay, the last one. You need to remember that if you feel like I'm going too fast at any time, one of the best things about this is that you can, which is why we do the videos, honestly, is you can pause, rewind, go back, listen to something again if it didn't make sense, and so forth. All right, so in number 3, we have to prove that Mrs. Alvarez is a motivated teacher. So first thing we need to do is go to page 37, and I'm going to have you pause the video. On page 37, see if you can find a piece of evidence by yourself that proves that Alvarez is a motivated teacher. In other words, she really just wants to get these kids engaged and involved. So you're looking for a piece of evidence on page 37 that would show us Miss Alvarez is awesome. All right, so go ahead and pause the video and see if you find the same piece that I find. All right, if you went to the second paragraph here, I think we're probably in the same area. The class seemed to be made up of the same type of droopy kids that had stood with me in the bus line. In contrast, Miss Alvarez has a lot of enthusiasm. She told us she was truly excited to be here on the first day of the new year. She went on to tell us that we were her first homeroom ever and that she's looking forward to starting each day with us. We sat there and stared at her without much reaction, but she smiled bravely through it, and we passed the first 10 minutes of the school year together. She asked us to all take out our schedules and check them. Mine said science, 8:30 to 9:25, portable 12. So out of looking at all of this, knowing that I have to prove that she's motivated and she really wants to be successful at this and that she's good at it, I kind of feel like, honestly, all I really need, I decided, was this sentence that, as you can see, I underlined it and have little arrows pointing. We sat there and stared at her without much reaction, but she smiled bravely through it. I like that. I also would not think that you were wrong if you wanted to use this quote, saying that she was truly excited to be here. Anything like that would show that she's motivated. There's lots of things you can use in here. That she's looking forward to starting each day with us. So there's lots of choices. I, in particular, decided to use the one that I could relate to the most, which is when you're trying to talk to students and motivate them, and they are all just simply staring at you with not much reaction. And she just was like, okay, here we go. I'm going to try and get through this. So I liked that quote. So this is the one that I'm going to use. All right, so the first thing I had to do was paraphrase the evidence. So if I'm going to use my 1, 2, 3 concept, I started with a transition. I chose to illustrate. I picked illustrate because I can totally just see this happening. I then did my smooth introduction with the author shows. And then I'm going to have Miss Alvarez be the beginning of my evidence. So that would be highlighted yellow. And I just simply reworded it saying that, that the author is showing that Miss Alvarez is determined to teach board students. Because if you were to go back and read that paragraph again, everybody's just staring at her without any reaction, which would allow me to make the inference that it's early, it's the first day, and they are bored. So that is how I paraphrased it. My smooth introduction, and then my 1, 2, 3, 3 being the evidence. So I've done all 3 parts. Now I have to quote the evidence. That makes me need to go back to page 37 because I can't use all of it. So I have to find the part that shows where they were bored and just staring at her. And I think what I might do is probably use the ellipses and just put sat there and stared without much reaction, ... and get rid of everything there. So as you can see, I've crossed out a lot. The only thing I'm really using is sat there and stared without much reaction. So I'm going to have to use the ellipses in the beginning, and I'm going to have the ellipses at the end. So if I follow my 1, 2, 3, I'm going to start with my transition. Then I'm going to have my smooth introduction. The author explains that the students, and then I have my direct quote. I put the ellipses, that the students sat there and stared at her without much reaction, but she smiled bravely through it. I don't need any more of that quote, so I put the ... the ellipses at the end with the end of my quotation marks. Now you're going to have to play around with the smooth reaction. If I'm only using part of the quote, sometimes figuring out, as you saw me just model, I had to figure out what part of the quote I wanted to use first to help me understand what I was going to write down, what words I needed to make the smooth introduction make sense. So if I'm starting my quote with sat, what words will go right before that in the smooth introduction that would allow it to make sense? To illustrate, the author explains that the students were sat there. That doesn't make sense. So play around with your smooth introduction and change the words. But I really feel in order to do that, you need to understand what part of the quote you're going to use first, especially if you're using the ellipses and you're chopping things out. So anyways, this takes practice, and this is the first time I've taught you the 1, 2, 3. So hopefully you'll be able to work on this by yourself today. Hopefully your paper looks something like this, where you've got all of the parts numbered and you've highlighted using the green and the yellow and maybe a pencil for underlining, or it looks like here I have a box. It really doesn't matter. Just go ahead and underline it for the smooth introduction part. So if you want to pause the video and just kind of make your notes look like this, it's really important to have a really good example because you're going to use these notes when you start today's assignment. So go ahead and pause the video before I give you the directions. Pause the video and make sure that yours looks like this. All right, now that you have your notes looking like mine, you can go ahead and turn it over. The assignment for today is on the back, and as you can see, I've given you the page numbers over there on the side column, and I kind of went back and forth here. Sometimes I gave you the direct quote, which means you would have to fill in and paraphrase this direct quote, or sometimes I did the opposite. Sometimes I gave you the paraphrased, and now you're going to have to go on page 21 and find the direct quote that would go right here. Either way, your goal is to practice using the 1, 2, 3, and you're doing this by yourself. So by the end of the period, you are going to have completed 6 of these, only 6, by yourself, because I went ahead and gave you the other half, okay, to kind of make this more bearable. So when you're done with this, it's going to go in the top basket. So again, you got to make sure your name is on it, okay? Why don't I give you one as an example? Let's find one. Here we go. So I gave you the direct quote on page 11. Your job was to paraphrase it, but you have to show me the 1, 2, 3. And again, just like we did with your notes, I want you to go ahead and use the highlighters and number the parts so that this is going to, kind of like when we color code the format, when we do this, when we break it down, it's almost like it forces you to double check your work, okay? So after you write what you think your answer is going to be in this box, that's when I want you to grab the green and yellow highlighter and identify the 1, 2, 3, just as a way to make sure you've got all 3 parts. So if I were to double check mine from the direct quote from page 11, I have my transition word, for instance. I have my smooth introduction, the dad expresses, and then my actual evidence is that he is very excited to go to training with Eric every single day. I've already taken this direct quote and I paraphrased it and I did it doing the 1, 2, 3. So you can copy this down as an example, but then that means you are now technically, since I just did one for you, you are now going to have 5 that you will do by yourself. When these are done, you can turn this into the top basket for a grade. So check over your work and make sure you're happy with your labeling before you turn this in for a grade. That's what I'm going to be checking for, is the 1, 2, 3, that you have the green and the yellow and the underlining identified with the numbers 1, 2, and 3 above each part. So make sure all of your answers look like this one right here.